Mueller time. Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, March 25th, 2019. The drama is wrapping up. Robert Mueller, late on Friday, submitted his report to the latest Attorney General of the Trump administration, Bill Barr. And on Sunday, we got a carefully filtered and highly spun summary of Mueller's work written by Bill Barr. And that's all we have to go on so far. I want to be very candid about that. But we can draw inferences and some key conclusions from what we know today. My key conclusion is that we just witnessed over 2 years of massive media malpractice. Our major news outlets became part of a coordinated propaganda operation, selling us the Russiagate narrative that originated with political operatives who were embarrassed by Hillary Clinton's loss. It was amplified by members of the deep state, people who cannot be trusted like James Clapper and John Brennan. And many people bought it hook, line, and sinker. And for over 2 years, every day that I do a podcast, I have shared my skepticism, promising to follow the facts, the evidence. And it pains me to say that I was right. We're going to get to some of the other people on my side of this story who are gloating right now, and I don't diminish their gloat. But I find this a very painful episode. And I want to acknowledge at the outset that according to Bill Barr's interpretation, his summary, the original claim that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that to WikiLeaks was sustained by Special Counsel Mueller. Now, as of this moment, we still have zero public evidence to support that. But I have to be honest with my listeners because that is the contention that I have been grinding against from the get-go. And it's based on the solid testimony of people like Bill Binney, former NSA technical director, Ray McGovern, a former analyst at the CIA, and people with similar worldviews and experience. So yes, I'm relieved that, as far as we know, Mueller did not provide either the evidence or the conclusion to prosecute, sustaining the so-called conspiracy or collusion between some elements of the Trump campaign and counterparts in Russia. And so Mueller's contention, as interpreted by Bill Barr, is that yes, Russia ran a campaign to help Trump, but the Trump people didn't know about it or didn't engage with it. They may have been aware and allowed things to happen, but that appears to be the conclusion that Mueller is drawing. And the shameful coverage provided by our corporate media outlets, or as Jerry Fresia likes to call them, the Ministry of Propaganda, continued right through the Sunday newspapers. And by mid-afternoon Washington time, when Barr's letter was released, the wind completely left the sails of the corporate media. And last night I witnessed Ari Melber, a man I knew as a young reporter for The Nation 10, 12 years ago, who has soiled himself by participating for good compensation, I imagine, and a real career boost in this promotion of the Russiagate narrative. His face was ashen. You could see that he was completely deflated, and he was struggling to find a center, claiming that he was going to just, dive into this and see where the chips would fall. And if he really meant that, he would have invited Glenn Greenwald or Aaron Mate to come on the show and explain how MSNBC, Ari Melber, Rachel Maddow, and the whole gang got it totally wrong and continued to sell us a bill of goods Now, I have to mention that I find it fitting and a fascinating metaphor that Rachel Maddow, the central promoter of the whole Russiagate telenovela, as I've called it, had taken a couple of days off. She was in Tennessee, trout fishing or fishing for something. I don't know exactly. And I respect that Rachel likes to go fishing. I think that's terrific. But she was in a studio in Tennessee anchoring her show, and she admitted that she had just been called in about 2 hours before broadcast time. And in a live interview with presidential candidate Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's also promoted the Russiagate narrative and was continuing to do so on Friday night, Rachel sheepishly admitted that she'd been fishing all day and hadn't caught a single fish. And I says to myself, Pete, and I'm the only one allowed to call him Pete. I said, Pete, she's been promoting Mueller's fishing expedition for over 2 years. And it just came up absolutely empty. Just like her Tennessee fishing expedition on Mueller Report Day. So let's go to what Bill Barr released on Sunday, and keep in mind that an effective tool of propaganda is that you get your spin on a controversial matter before anybody else gets a chance to do so, and those initial impressions will likely stick, and in many cases would have to be pried away from the individuals who hold them. So Barr writes, the special counsel's report's divided into 2 parts. The first describes the results of the investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. The report outlines the Russian effort to influence the election, documents crimes committed by persons associated with the Russian government in connection with those efforts. The report further explains a primary consideration for the special counsel's investigation was whether any Americans, including individuals associated with the Trump campaign, joined the Russian conspiracies to influence the election. The investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in its efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign. And a partial quote from the report, I stress that it's partial because we don't know the line that came before or the line that came after. And we know that this is a sentence fragment because they correctly capitalized the T but put it in brackets at the beginning of this quote. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Now, here's the part that is difficult for me. The special counsel found that Russian government actors successfully hacked into computers and obtained emails from persons affiliated with the Clinton campaign and Democratic Party organizations and publicly disseminated those materials through various intermediaries, including WikiLeaks. They note the special counsel brought criminal charges against a number of Russian military officers for conspiring to hack into computers in the United States. But the special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. Now, friends, I remain skeptical because this summary offers us no evidence, no affirmation or validation of the claim that Russians, government actors in particular, hacked into computers. And the handoff to WikiLeaks, again, has not been proven publicly. And the various intermediaries refers to DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0. And Bill Binney and Ray McGovern and the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity have raised real serious questions about who exactly Guccifer was and that many different people might have been impersonating that character. So this leaves me very ungratified, and I hope that the Democratic calls for release of the full report absent the grand jury part, which we're told cannot be released publicly. We may find out more. We may see substantiation for this claim. But because there are so many figures, and we'll get to this in a moment, who might have had knowledge of the sequence of events related to the emails, we also have to separate the emails that were legally released by the State Department under prodding from Jason Leopold, now at BuzzFeed, are very different from those that were released through the WikiLeaks channel, however they were given to WikiLeaks. And I want to emphasize, last week I reported that the testimony of Peter Strzok, the top FBI investigator under Comey, into the Clinton emails charges or controversy, he clearly stated that they were not permitted to look at the content of the emails between the Clinton Foundation and the State Department. Those were not Russian hacked or, allegedly Russian hacked. Those came out through the Jason Leopold FOIA actions. And they did not look at the content. They didn't look at the pay-for-play that is suggested very clearly by the communications between the top staff of Secretary of State Clinton and the people who were running the Clinton Foundation. That's just one example of an unexplored lead. Now, the second piece of Barr's summary letter relates to obstruction of justice. And this is where we have to be very skeptical of Barr and of Bob Mueller. Because Mueller apparently, let's remember, he's a Republican, he's a made man in the deep state, he was the FBI director who did all sorts of sordid things following 9/11 under the expanded authorities of the Patriot Act. And Bob Mueller set it up so that Bill Barr could make the determination. Gosh, did Trump obstruct justice? And Barr says he consulted with Mueller, he consulted with Rod Rosenstein, and by golly, he concluded that the evidence developed during the special counsel's investigation, quote, is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense. He went on to say that this was not made based on the issues of whether or not a sitting president can be indicted, and that, legal analysts point out, is a red herring. According to Jessica Levinson, professor at Loyola Law in Los Angeles, you do not need to prove an underlying crime to prove obstruction of justice. Martha Stewart is quite aware of that. And so in this claim that this was not, in other words, the indictment was not publicized because of the policy of not indicting a sitting president. But, of course, going back to Watergate, Richard Nixon was named an unindicted co-conspirator. And I believe that at minimum, the Michael Cohen case makes Trump a conspirator, a co-conspirator with Cohen. Cohen says he was instructed by Trump. And for Robert Mueller to tee this up in a manner that Bill Barr can sweep it away and make the determination that there was no obstruction, well, I find that deeply insulting because the facts, to me, are as plain as day. And this punts it to Congress, where we know the Democrats have no appetite to impeach Trump for the obvious obstruction of justice. And Barr also used this to claim, and that's what I referred to a minute ago, that because the special counsel did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime, well, that bears upon the president's intent with respect to obstruction? So there are clear questions here that are begged by the release of this summary report. And there will be this big battle. Every Democrat in the country is saying release the entire report. But I want to pause for a moment here. Not the usual pause to thank my subscribers. We'll do that in a moment. But I want to name some names here of the people who were wrong and the people who soiled themselves and sullied their professional reputations by betting so heavily on Russiagate. And it starts with Rachel Maddow, Ari Melber, Chris Hayes, the entire crew at MSNBC. CNN places a close second. Remember, there are more than 50 reports that were published or broadcast that have been proven false. But there are rare corrections, never an admission of real error, and they just move the goalposts and move on and dazzle you with some other negative issue about Trump, and he gives us plenty of them. Jason Leopold at BuzzFeed. I still consider him a friend, but we haven't spoken since that difficult podcast last year, where I confronted him about his anonymous-sourced, leak-based reporting. David K. Johnston. In a moment, I'm going to play a clip from Democracy Now!, where, to his credit, David, the Pulitzer Prize-winning former New York Times reporter, has written multiple books about Trump. He was on to Trump before anybody cared about Trump. He's exposed his deep corruption. And I have a lot of respect for David, including that he went on opposite Greenwald and took quite a pounding. And Johnston continues to believe that Trump is an asset of Russia. He defined that in the interview. And it's sad to see him, despite Mueller's decision not to pursue these claims of Russian conspiracy, because he couldn't find any evidence. David K. Johnston was peddling feverishly to try to challenge what is a clear reality. David Korn, Michael Isikoff, Mother Jones Magazine. I'm so disappointed in these people. They lost their compass. They stopped using alleged, reported, reputed, accused. And they treated so many things that were not proven as fact. James Risen, who joined The Intercept as some sort of a counterbalance to Glenn Greenwald. And let's be fair about Glenn. He's written a lot of great columns about his skepticism about Russiagate. But there were many months when he did not utter a word. He was curiously silent. Was that because Pierre Omidyar sat on him? Was it because Jimmy Risen came over from the New York Times and, was some sort of an attempt at balance with Greenwald? I don't know. And I'll just add Caroline Fredrickson. I used to talk to her when she was at the ACLU, and there she was on MSNBC last night with an op-ed that was published in one of the weekend editions of the New York Times. And so this is an experience where we've all lost. Nobody wins in a pissing contest like this. And I want to list for you some of the things that Mueller ignored or overlooked or failed to pursue in this investigation. He never talked to Bill Binney or Ray McGovern, never talked to Julian Assange or Craig Murray, the British ambassador who says he brought emails that he picked up on a thumb drive in Washington, D.C. at American University. He brought them to WikiLeaks. The Seth Rich murder is a closed case, but it's not. We're just told to close our minds to it. Imran Awan, Debbie Wasserman Schultz IT guy, not aware of any contact with him and the special counsel. Stephen Halper, the super-secret Republican operative who was hanging out in Britain and appeared to arrange the encounter that George Papadopoulos had with the Australian ambassador. Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6. Now, maybe that's in the Mueller report. Didn't make the summary. But as I see it today, Robert Mueller did what Tricky Dick Nixon wanted. The limited hangout. You act like you've sifted through every bit of evidence, and you report and report and report. But gosh, you just didn't find that smoking gun. Oh, and I forgot one other guy that I want to mention. I have long respected James Bamford, the guy who's written 3 books about the NSA. And in my last interview with Jim, many listeners emailed and said, Peter, did he really just blow past Bill Binney and say that Binney's work isn't credible? And the answer is yes. And on Facebook today, here's James Bamford kind of backpedaling by using Matt Taibbi. I completely agree with Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi that the 2-year nonstop hysterical reporting on Russiagate should be a death blow for the reputation of the American news media. And, quote, the most disturbing story involved Maria Butina. Now, you heard Jim Bamford tell the truth about Maria Butina and expose the corporate media's lies about that whole episode. But when it came to hack versus leak, Binney versus unproven claims, Bamford went with the consensus while pointing out that he is not a PAC journalist. And I'm not gunning for Jim Bamford here. I'm pointing out these painful episodes and the disclosures, and the way people who I respect departed from fundamentals of journalism and fact-based reporting. And there was some laziness to this, just saying, well, you know, the Times and the Post report all this, so I guess we'll just go along with it. And I have to tell you, there were moments when I thought, oh, gosh, you know, I ought to just throw in the towel here. Because the overwhelming machinery of American media was so obsessed with the narrative based on leaks, and if there's evidence, it's not publicly available. This has been a very trying period. I know I've lost listeners. I know I've lost subscribers. And I do hope that you can appreciate that I kind of stayed steady with this, followed my instincts, followed the sources who I respect. And now it's time for me to pause and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast and people who did not desert me during this difficult time, like Benny Alto, the man with multiple subscriptions, Aidan McAleer, Suzanne Bowen. I know she and her husband Glenn think I am a wacky lefty. And Ray Lutz at Citizens Oversight recently renewed an annual subscription. And let me mention Faith Peoples, too, because she's next on the list here, and she is a stalwart supporter. I'd like you to join them. And maybe you want to give me an extra boost, a one-time contribution, or take out a new subscription as a kind of validation for the work that I've done and the steadfastness that I hope I have demonstrated to you. Just visit peterbcollins.com. Click menu, click Become a Subscriber. You're on the sign-up page. You can take care of business there. And if you hate PayPal, you can communicate with me through the U.S. mail. P.O. Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Now, I get kind of wrapped up here and carried away. I've got a couple of sound clips I want to play for you. First up is Aaron Mate. And this is a young man who I've grown to respect greatly. And I also appreciate that The Nation magazine allowed him to publish his contrary, skeptical, and journalistically sound essays and reports on Russiagate. Aaron Mate produced a 15-minute video that I've linked to. It's at the Gray Zone Project. Here's a clip.
So let's first just hear what Mueller says on this core issue of whether or not there was a conspiracy between Trump and Russia. Mueller says this, quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." And Mueller takes a very expansive view of what coordinated could mean. It's not just express, but also even tacit coordination. So that right there is an unambiguous rejection of the conspiracy theory that has dominated our politics for the last 2+ years.
So there's much more, and follow the link. I encourage you to watch Aaron Mate's report. Also, Glenn Greenwald, as I mentioned, appeared opposite David K. Johnston on Democracy Now! Today, and here is part of Greenwald's fiery commentary.
All we heard for 20 months is that Robert Mueller is a man of the greatest integrity and patriotism. The very idea, just think about this, that he would allow Bill Barr to run around making false and misleading distortions about what the Mueller team found, and not one person on the Mueller team, including Bob Mueller himself, would stand up and say, wait a minute, he's distorting what our findings was. That is laughable. That's exactly the kind of conspiracy theories that led to this entire mess in the first place, and we should no longer tolerate this. Rachel Maddow and MSNBC are the Judy Millers of this story, except unlike Judy Miller, who was scapegoated for doing things that her male colleague did and had her career destroyed, Rachel Maddow will continue to make $10 million a year for NBC because she's their most valuable brand, and there will be no reckoning in consequences for this story that the media got radically, fundamentally, and deliberately wrong for almost 3 years now in a very dangerous way.
Well, I fully agree with Greenwald, and you can watch the rest of the Democracy Now! Package. It's over half an hour, and the link is in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Trump reacted today, saying it wouldn't bother him at all if the Mueller report is released, but that is up to the Attorney General. When asked if Mueller had acted honorably, the president said yes, he did, and failed to mention all those angry tweets that he flipped off to Mueller over the last almost 2 years. And then Trump, he's got some basis to be angry. They've done so many evil things, he said. It was a false narrative. It was a terrible thing. We can never let this happen to another president again. I can tell you that. I say it very strongly. Very few people I know could have handled it. Yeah, because he's so special. We can never let this happen to another president again. Now, what this sets up, the failure of the media, only empowers Trump more to call it fake news. There has been fake news about Trump and Russia. And this is the part that we will pay a price for a long, long time. And the Democratic support for it, they're moving the goalposts. They're slipping away. They're saying, well, release the report. And they've already made it very clear they're not going to impeach Trump. They just want to keep the investigations going and work to use this for political purposes into the 2020 election. And one of the things that we have to look at here is that Trump repeatedly said there was no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. And I've told you that was one of the reasons I often suspected that my own suspicions were wrong. Because he lies so compulsively and obsessively that I figured that was one of them. One comment from yesterday, Trump, it's a shame that our country had to go through this. To be honest, it's a shame that your president had to, there he is, feeling sorry for himself again, that your president has had to go through this before I even get elected again. This was an illegal takedown that failed. Will there be an investigation? Will we learn the origins of the investigation? The collusion of Brennan and Clapper and the other top spooks under the Obama administration? The way James Comey channeled J. Edgar Hoover by delivering the Steele dossier to Trump before he took office? And saying, well, we wouldn't want this to get out, would we? Now to the gloaters, and I'm going to run through this quickly. Joe Laria, now the editor at Consortium News, published a piece on November 5th of 2016 at the Huffington Post, saying, this is the opening line, if Hillary Clinton loses a very tight election, her ace in the hole could be Russia. In the wake of WikiLeaks and FBI revelations, Clinton's sizable lead has evaporated. A tight result is looking more and more possible. And this is prescient. It truly is. Also, Joe Laria republished an article that Robert Perry posted at Consortium News 2 years ago this week, The Sleazy Origins of Russiagate. Bob Perry was on this early. Let's just pull one quote here. You have the words of Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat, in his opening statement at last week's public hearing on so-called Russiagate. Schiff's seamless 15-minute narrative of the Trump campaign's alleged collaboration with Russia followed the script prepared by former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele, who was hired as an opposition researcher to dig up derogatory information on Trump. Then there's Caitlin Johnstone. She's never shy about getting in your face. Quote, the Mueller report is in. They were wrong. We were right. A completely unhindered investigation has failed to convict a single American of any conspiracy with the Russian government. No further indictments are coming. The political media class which sold rank-and-file Americans on the lie that the Mueller investigation was going to bring down this presidency were liars and frauds, and none of the goalpost moving that I am sure is already beginning to happen will change that. And later, she writes, I've been saying that Russiagate is bullshit from the beginning, and I've been called a Trump shill, a Kremlin propagandist, a Nazi, and a troll every day for saying so by credulous mass media consuming dupes who drank the Kool-Aid. The insane, maniacal, McCarthyite feeding frenzy that these people were plunged into by nonstop mass media propaganda drowned out the important voices who tried to argue that public energy was being sucked into the Russia hysteria. And she closes with this. We must never let them forget what they did or what they cost us all. We must never let mainstream Democrats forget how crazy they got, how much time and energy they wasted, how very, very wrong they were, and how very, very right we were. Never stop reminding of this. Never stop mocking them for it. Never stop mocking their idiotic Rachel Maddow worship. Never stop mocking the Robert Mueller prayer candles, or making fun of the way they blamed all their problems on Susan Sarandon. I don't want to bobble her thing, but I'd still like to interview Caitlin Johnstone. So I've run long here, and I'm going to take a little more time. I have linked to Richard Wolff's commentary published at The Guardian today. He's a Democratic apologist and a paid lobbyist, last time I checked. And he says he tries to put a positive spin on this. There'll be many Democrats disappointed that Mueller didn't scream guilty. It means a year of more congressional revelations, a year of more indictments. He's talking about the New York indictments. It means the 2020 election can be forward-looking about Trump's fitness for office rather than backward-looking about the last election. It means more consideration of corruption and less talk of collusion. But what voters readily understand is the stench of corruption around a man who promised to drain the swamp. Well, that's happy talk. Trump's voters are not deserting him. Not over corruption or non-collusion. You've got it. Neil Katyal has an op-ed that's in the New York Times today. He wrote the special counsel law. He doesn't really add much to the story. He just says we need to see the full report. And now, quickly to a couple of other items beyond Mueller. Well, is it Muellergate time today? Netanyahu came to Washington, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Bibi had to cut short his visit because a rocket launched from Gaza struck a house in central Israel, injuring 7 people. So he had to he had to cancel his campaign stops for his Israeli re-election. The campaign stops here in the U.S. He's skipping his AIPAC talk, and to see the guy who claims full exoneration, Trump, and it is far short of that, hanging out with his corrupt counterpart from Israel is, it's rich. It truly is. So Netanyahu is back in Israel, and he'll have to campaign for his re-election from there. Mike Pence took up the gap there at AIPAC with the meeting that started yesterday by smearing Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota, and falsely claiming without naming her that she suggested dual loyalties, that American Jews have dual loyalties. And let's be fair about what she said. She said she feels the pressure to support Israel. She didn't talk about other people, and she never mentioned Jews. So to claim that she's anti-Semitic is just, it's a smear. Pence went on to blast Democratic presidential candidates for allegedly boycotting the conference. I'm glad many of them took a pass this year. And to applause, he said it's wrong to boycott Israel, wrong to boycott AIPAC. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell's trying to drive a wedge further between Americans. You know, it's the Russians who sowed dissent in our country, but it's the Americans who work so hard to really, really drive it deep. So there are two bills before the Senate. One is a direct rebuke of Ilhan Omar and the dual loyalties comment. The other is a bill that would target anti-Semitism on college campuses through the Department of Education's Civil Rights Enforcement Division. As you know, this is a very, dangerous precedent to selectively protect speech and to claim that criticism of the State of Israel is anti-Semitic. This is part of a whole drive that is exposed in the suppressed Al Jazeera documentary called The Lobby. And we have Jeremy Ben-Ami, the president of the liberal Zionist American group J Street. This legislation appears designed less to combat anti-Semitism than to have a chilling effect and to crack down on campus critics of Israel. It is misguided to legislatively declare a broad range of nonviolent campus criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, especially at a time when the prime driver of anti-Semitism is the xenophobic, white nationalist far right. This bill is part of a cynical effort by some of its right-wing proponents to turn the issue of anti-Semitism into a partisan political weapon. Amen there. And finally today, Brexit is still a mess. 1 million people took to the streets of London on Saturday, calling for another referendum. They want to stay in the European Union, and Theresa May is just useless, and she knows it. Quote, I have to conclude that as things stand, there is still not sufficient support in the House to bring back the deal for a third meaningful vote this week, and her cabinet is threatening to desert her. That's all I got time for, and I hope I didn't impose too much on you today by running long, but there is a lot to comment on, and I hope you'll share this podcast far and wide, particularly with Russiagate promoters. You'll find it on YouTube, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.